Today is November 30th, 2023. This is the 23rd episode of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over a bunch of different things between the Big Ten football championship game, a new coach in football, and then the start of conference play in basketball. So, Joe, we got this interesting time period where kind of a lot of teams or a lot of sports are happening for both football and basketball. So we're going to start with football as we usually do, and we're going to go to Bloomington. Indiana has a new football coach. They do not get John Gruden. Doesn't look like that was ever really going to happen, but they do hire somebody who has won about as many college football games as you can. They go with James Madison's Curt Cignetti, and he has an incredible record over the past couple of years, just 52-11, which is just crazy. He took them up from, Division 1A or FBS and into the Sun Belt, and he has done nothing but win in his career. Every single year he's been a head coach. He's had a winning record. That record is going to be put to the test next year at IU.
Sean, I thought it was a really out-of-the-box hire. Perhaps he came up on some coaching boards at the beginning of this search, but I thought Indiana would. This is the first time their last two hires, they went coordinator and then they promoted Allen from within. So I'm going to tip my cap seriously to the IU administration and to the athletic department. Really thought they would go with someone they're familiar with. I know they interviewed Mike Hart, Michigan's running back coach, who used to be their co-OC. This is a program that in our lifetime hasn't really done too much. They had the magical COVID year, but besides that, really a 6-7 win team as the ceiling. So interested to see how he does. Was born in Pittsburgh, had some experience at Pitt, but he's really jumped around. He's mainly been in the south of the Mason-Dixon for the better part of the last decade. So it'll be interesting to see where he gets his recruiting base from. If he wants to stay in the state of Indiana, expand to the Midwest, he'll certainly have to hire, kind of like Jonathan Smith, try to hire coordinators that know these areas and recruit these areas better than he does. So I think it's a really interesting hire, very similar to Smith. So not what I would have guessed at the beginning, though. Smith is probably one you could have put in the top 6 at MSU. I wouldn't have put Cignetti in the top 6 at IU. So really interested to see how this turns out.
He was actually 52-9 in his head coaching career, not 52-11. Not sure why I gave him 2 extra losses, but he's the best Group of 5 coach out there, and Indiana pulls the trigger. This is now back-to-back, I would say, out-of-the-box hires for Scott Dolson and IU. If you remember basketball a couple years ago, Mike Woodson kind of came out of nowhere, somebody that's never coached in college before, and now they go with somebody who's never really been involved with the Big Ten from what we can tell. So we'll see how that goes. Again, as we've said before, there's no divisions next year, so we'll see if that benefits or hurts a team like Indiana. Joe, we've got a lot of transfers and coordinators and stuff, so why don't you catch us up on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest aspect of news is Trent Bray being hired at Oregon State, and why that's so big is I think perhaps he would have came over with Jonathan Smith, but there were some parting shots perhaps from both parties, not necessarily from the two men themselves. So definitely think Michigan State's going to have to make their priority number one getting a really good defensive coordinator. There's a whole list of options. They could promote guys who've been with the program before. A name that pops up is Mike Tressel, who's currently the DC at Wisconsin. Maybe getting him back would be a great thing. He's familiar with the program. Then again, the counter argument could be he is a guy that is from the D'Antonio era, and I don't know how much of that era they want, specifically the end part of that era, they would want back. Penn State, speaking of other coordinators, hired Kansas offensive coordinator. I'm reading it out because Andy Kolodnicki. Now, they have a very interesting offense. They run different run schemes, run a lot to the side, do a lot of different things than Penn State's current run game. I think with Singleton and Allen presumably back, and I say presumably because you never know with transfers at this stage, that he has a lot of pieces to work with. I think what he's mainly going to be judged on is the development of Drew Aller and trying to make him a lot better passer in these bigger games. Now, when he has a lot of time to throw, he's been very efficient. He takes care of the ball very well. But for Penn State, it's kind of like Purdue basketball, to address a question we're going to get but we're going to get later in the show. Always like 1 or 2 games short, and this guy's job is explicitly to make the offense perform even better in these circumstances where they've come up short in the past 5 years. So certainly interesting, and we're going to really tell if this guy was the was the genius behind Kansas's offense, or if it was truly Lance Leipold. So, think this could be a very think this has the potential to be a very good hire. This is probably the hire I'm most excited about for Penn State.
So the last thing we're going to talk about here, Joe, before we turn it over to hoops, is the college football playoff rankings. Michigan was put second, which I think was a little bit surprising, at least to me, that they weren't first. And Ohio State drops all the way to 6. Now, Michigan, it is really simple that if they win, they are in. Don't want to put this out there, but even if they do lose, they still may be in. But they are win and they're in. Probably will be wearing the home uniforms in that game if they do win. And then Ohio State at 6 without another game. It is really going to be tough for the Buckeyes to get in. Pretty much every result is going to have to go their way, and still, they might not get in because a one-loss team with a conference championship loss might be pushed over Ohio State. So we'll go to Michigan first for you. So, were you surprised that they were second and not ahead of Georgia?
No, I was not surprised. I think last year they had a stronger case to be number one, believe it or not, even though Georgia last year was still winning games by a significant margin. And I thought so because last year they went into the horseshoe and absolutely blew the brakes off Ohio State. This time it was a lot closer a game. And really the resumes comparing year to year were pretty similar. They had 2 wins over top 10 teams, being Penn State and Ohio State. You just flip whether which one was home or away. So, no, Sean, I don't necessarily disagree either. I think the thinking of the committee, they do claim the resume, blah, blah, but they probably do figure, as many fans do, that Georgia would beat Michigan if they lined up on a neutral field today. As for the championship game, Sean, I don't want to jump the gun here, but there's not really too much to preview. This is a matter of Michigan not doing what they did against TCU in the first half times a million, because it would take that for Iowa to score the adequate amount of points to even compete with Michigan. So I think JJ just has to take care of the ball, keep the ball away from Sebastian Castro. Don't let Joe Evans strip sack you or hit Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards so they fumble. But I really do think this will be a very 70-30 Michigan crowd. It was that 2 years ago when Iowa had a lot more optimism going into this game. I get the idea more that Iowa fans are going even for laughing's sake, or the fact that this is the last Big Ten title game they may go to in a while, based on the no division structures we'll have next year. So, key to the game for Michigan: take care of the ball. If they get up 2 scores, the game will probably be over. And the key for Iowa is be innovative. Stop doing the same running that you've been doing. They did run pretty well in Nebraska last week, but they also, whenever they got to third down and had to pass, nothing was happening, and they did not protect Deacon Hill very well. So, per usual, Sean, not a really exciting championship game. Would have been a lot more exciting had one of, if not both, Eric All and Cade McNamara had been healthy. But I will take a bow right now because I was really high on Iowa at the beginning of the year. I was wrong about them being very good, but they are 10-2 and they did win the West, even though it's more of a last man standing thing as opposed to him being the guy getting rid of everyone. It's more they took the less amount of hits. That's how I'll say it.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny things going around about some of the odds for Iowa in this game, and that they're basically even odds to score a point, which is a little bit crazy, I think. I mean, it's very hard to go an entire game without scoring. Even if there's like a turnover in field goal range or something, usually points happen. I'm not saying Michigan will shut out Iowa, but I mean, there's not a better defense in the country, I don't think, and there's probably not a worse offense. So, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but this game will not be close. I would say Michigan, you probably try and get your starters out of the game by the fourth quarter, but with 3, potentially 4 weeks before a college football playoff game, maybe you let them go for the whole game, just because rust is a big factor, and if something were to happen, chances are you'd be able to shake that off by the end of December. But the line right now is 22 for Michigan, and the over-under is 35.5. So not many points for Iowa in there. It'll be at 8 o'clock on Saturday at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis on Fox. Probably will not be the most competitive championship game, but the way that they lined it up is I think all of them. Yeah, so it will be the them and the ACC at the same time, and then they've staggered the games, so I don't think there'll be more than maybe 2 or 3 on at a time, which is good for viewers. So Joe, that's everything we've got for football. Last thing I'm going to ask about you actually first before we go to basketball. Were you surprised that Ohio State dropped all the way to 6th?
I was, because I thought they would drop to 5, meaning they'd be the highest ranked one-loss team, especially because their loss was better than Oregon's in terms of who they lost to. But then again, Oregon did lose to the number 3 team in the country, and they had a little more control of that game than Ohio State. And you also couple the fact that Oregon's not strength of schedule, more of their wins they had more quality wins than Ohio State. Though Ohio State did have Penn State and Notre Dame. So for Ohio State, I'm going to answer the question now because it was posed twice, so I'll save our viewers time. If I'm a Buckeye fan, here's what I need to root for. I need Washington to beat Oregon because, frankly, let's say Oregon wins in a very close manner or in overtime, last-second field goal. What's the argument to keep Washington out? They'll say, we beat the team we beat the team we lost to. We're going to be punished because we played an extra game as opposed to Ohio State, who just sat on the couch. And we saw this a little last year with TCU, and I mean, TCU was not punished. They stayed in the 3 spot, even though they lost the Big 12 title game. So I do think your interest is cheering for Washington. And then the obvious, you got to cheer for Texas to lose and for Florida State to lose, because
and Georgia to win too.
And Georgia to win, yes. Because even though Alabama and Texas are ranked below you, they will jump you. Even Texas, because they'll get another top 20 win. And I'll put it this way: if Texas wins and all the other shock holds except Florida State losing, the debate would be between Washington and Texas, not Ohio State and Texas. So, gonna be. I think last year it was pretty clear because only USC had to lose. This year you'd probably need 3 to 4 things to happen. So
yeah, the way that Ohio State gets in is the top 3 win, and then everyone else loses, and they kind of back into the 4th spot because it's hard to move up 2 spots without playing.
Exactly.
And, it doesn't seem like all of those things are going to go their way, and even if they do, and Washington looks good, and a 1-loss Washington against a 1-loss Ohio State it's just like, so. I think Ohio State deserves a little more respect than they're being given, but it's just the nature of, college football, and all the other leagues except for the SEC are first versus second championship games, and the Big Ten is not this year. It will be next year, so obviously the matchups would have been different. But if there was one big division in the Big Ten, you would think Ohio State would have had another crack at Michigan. So the division rules are not helping the Buckeyes in this case, but it's the last time we'll ever have to deal with that. So off to basketball, under the halfway point. Perfect timing. Joe, a lot of bye games in hoops since the last time we talked. Don't think we really have to go over much of those. All the Big Ten teams won, and none of them were particularly close either, which is great for the numbers. We've got 2 Big Ten matchups tomorrow, Joe, 7 o'clock on BTN. Maryland visits the Hoosiers. Maryland scored 100 points in their last game, which you might not have seen coming. And Indiana looked the best that they have all year against Harvard. So take us through what's going to go down in this one.
I think this is a must-win game for Indiana. And it's really not even a must-win as opposed to don't lose at home opening night to a Maryland team that, let's face it, even though they scored 100 points the last time out, has been probably one of the biggest disappointments across the Big Ten. So Indiana is favored by 2.5. Sean, is the biggest concern in this game as an Indiana fan a matter of getting rebounds or just not playing to Maryland's style?
I don't know. I think the biggest concern is Xavier Johnson's injured, and even if he does try to play, he tried to play against Harvard and he was hurt, and it was costing the team. Like you don't want to tell him not to play, but if he's not good, like he can't play, because he was getting blown by some guards and wasn't really a factor on offense either. But I think stylistically, like the teams play pretty similar, with mostly going to drive it and mostly going for twos and playing kind of tough basketball. Maryland is, even in their losses this year, they've still played pretty hard. But Indiana's way bigger than Maryland size-wise. So if they are out-rebounded, or even if it's, close, I think that will be an advantage for the Terrapins. They in their last game out against Ryder, like you said, it was like 101-75 or something. And, I've watched Ryder a bunch being in the MAC. They do not like to run a lot. So I don't know what happened there. They are usually pretty good defensively and usually play in the 50s. And maybe they just thought, you know what, let's get out and run with these big guys. But that was a puzzling one. But I think it's going to come down to Indiana's offense, because, Maryland will not blow them out. They don't blow teams out. And can Indiana use their size? And if they don't, then Maryland's going to win, because Indiana has had issues with Maryland in the past, especially staying in front of Jameer Young and some of their guards. But next game tomorrow, Joe, Purdue at Northwestern, 9 o'clock on BTN. Purdue minus 8.5. Purdue has looked real good as of late, as we've said, looked great in Maui, took care of a Texas Southern team that always finds their way into the NCAA tournament. This seems like a big test for Northwestern. You're coming off of last year being so great. This is the first time that we've really seen them this year. They do have one loss, but this is going to be a good one in Illinois.
Yeah, Sean, this was one of Purdue's losses. This is when they had that little February skid last year. Um, I think the only way Northwestern has a chance is you need your best players to have their best game, and that's Boo Buie. One thing that he's known for is making these ludicrous shots, frankly, shots that would make most basketball coaches, including probably Chris Collins, pull hair out of their head. But that's the kind of basket that'll electrify the home crowd and take Purdue, who is honestly, they've handled the task of being a favorite this year really well. I mean, 7-0, all the wins they've had. But with that said, Sean, I think this is their first real road test. This is a place they have some ghosts, as I mentioned last year. And frankly, Northwestern should try to play to that a lot. If they do get a lead, I think it's going to be critical. They can't let Purdue get back into it. This is a game where Northwestern's going to have to stick around and then take a lead and never look back, because Purdue, frankly, is not a team you want to play behind from, because this is a battle of frustration, Sean, because it's equally frustrating to see Boo Buie make a end of shot clock off the backboard kind of shot and be down 5 at home, claw your way all the way back, only for Zach Edey to score again. So I really think winning the first half and winning the first 4 minutes of the second half is going to be the biggest key for Northwestern to stay competitive, to pull off an upset. What do you think, Sean?
Yeah, it's just the longer that it's a game, the better for Northwestern, because you've seen some crazier things down the stretch with Bowie. And I just think as long as, you got to hold off the Purdue run for as long as you can and believe a little bit that you can win. If Purdue's up 16-5 at the first media timeout, it's over. And the guards have, turned the ball over a little bit last year when you pressured them. I mean, they turned it over a little bit, but they haven't done that yet this year against teams that are a whole lot better than Northwestern. So I'd be surprised if Purdue doesn't kind of take care of business here, or they might end up winning by 7 or something, but it'll still be a game where they're up double digits the whole way. But Northwestern can send a real big message here if they do pull this one off, similar to like they did last year. We've got a couple of non-conference games on Saturday, Joe. Marquette at Wisconsin, 12:30 on Saturday on Fox. This is going to be a good one. Wisconsin been incredibly up and down this year, but Marquette is rightfully so ranked in the top 4, runners up to Purdue and Maui. Wisconsin is at home, but any chance that you think they can pull off a pretty big upset here?
I certainly do. I think we've praised their bench on previous episodes. This is a game where the starters are going to have to do majority of the work with their bench, kind of doing a traditional thing, just supplementing or filling in when they are on rest. I do think Wisconsin's going to keep this close. I don't see Marquette blowing them out just because of the way Wisconsin, they. I think you mentioned it last time, Sean. Maybe we saw this in one of the comments or in a few of our direct messages. Wisconsin is the ultimate team that plays to their competition, right? Like last year, as bad as Minnesota was, Wisconsin was in dogfights with them, and as opposed to Marquette, they've had so many games. I mean, just being in Maui, that's probably enough top 5, top 10 games for an entire season, let alone a 3-day stretch. Maybe Marquette's not. Maybe they're. I doubt they're not excited to play in the Kohl Center. It just might be just an everyday kind of game for them versus Wisconsin. This is definitely the biggest game of their season. I understand they had a big test against Tennessee, but a Saturday game where now basketball is the focus of that campus. That place is going to be packed and rocking. 12:30 Eastern, 11:30 start time. I think if Wisconsin gets off to a hot start, I actually do think they'll pull off an upset just because playing catch up against the Badgers is the most frustrating thing on earth. So I'll give Wisconsin, how about this, a 40% chance to pull off the upset, which is pretty good.
Yeah, I would say it's around there too. I mean, Marquette is really good. You're going to have to play well for the entire game. You're going to have to make it a dogfight and win by a couple points at the end. And Marquette doesn't really shy away from those at all. So I would think, Wisconsin says, all right, we want to hold the ball for 25 seconds and then shoot it. Marquette's like, all right, fine, we'll do that too, and we'll win 55-52 or something like that. But it's a real good opportunity for a big win for the Big Ten. We've said that a lot. Big Ten has failed that test more times than not, but they've
except Purdue and Wisconsin once. That was it.
Except for Purdue, who did win a narrow one against Marquette. So Marquette could be 0-2 against the Big Ten here, but it should be a good one.
1-2, they beat Illinois.
Oh, that's right. But it should be a good one here in Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I'm not entirely sure about this, but I think they did win at Marquette last year, which was a little odd because Marquette was awesome and Wisconsin was not. So they'll be looking for revenge. The other non-conference game is your Michigan Wolverines going to Oregon, 3:30 Eastern on FS1. This is an odd game, Joe. It's not part of a rivalry or a series or an MTE. It's just a Power 5 away game. And Oregon's not great, but it's a good opportunity for a road win.
God, I see a lot of the advanced metrics giving Michigan a decent shot. I think they're very similar teams. The funny thing about Oregon is they don't have a guy who their leading scorer averages 12.5 points a game, and this is their first. I don't even want to say test for Oregon. This is their first really good opponent they've played. I get Alabama; they did lose to them, but this is their first opponent per se at home and non kind of, how would I put this, non-neutral setting. That's how I would say it. I'll be honest, Sean. I don't have a lot of faith that Michigan will pull this out. Like I've said, their next 3 games are critical. They absolutely have to win 1, but winning 2 would be huge. How Michigan wins this game, it's doing the exact opposite of what they've done in the Memphis and Texas Tech games, and even the Long Beach State game. You can't go 4 to 5 minutes without a basket. We've said this about them last year. With all the offensive talent they had, they would do that in so many games, and certainly be against good defensive teams like, Maryland and Wisconsin. But, based on what I've seen from Texas Tech tonight and Memphis, they're not great defensive teams. They can score the ball, but if Michigan falls behind 10 early, that's going to be the game. Oregon's not Stanford. Oregon has significantly more talent, and you could get away with that against a Pac-12 team like Stanford. But this is a game Michigan is just going to have to stay close in. And, you know, again, they cannot leave guys uncontested threes, uncontested layups, which has been a theme we've seen all year. So if that theme continues, I think this game could get pretty ugly and Oregon could win by double digits. But I'll put it this way, Sean. If the game's decided by double digits, it'll be Oregon. But if it's single digits, 70% chance it's the Wolverines pulling it out. But we'll certainly talk about that Indiana-Michigan matchup on the Monday episode. So let's get into the last matchup Saturday, Sean.
Yeah, I'll just say no line yet for this game as it's on Saturday. It'll come out sometime tomorrow. Torvik's got it at 5 for Oregon, which is a little high, I think. Oregon played really poorly in their Florida trip. They did play Florida A&M on the road and won a narrow one there against a team in the 300s, and then they lost to Santa Clara and Alabama in the tournament that Ohio State won, Fort Myers, I think. They have not been good defensively recently, and like you said, Michigan has not really defended this year, and then they had a couple offensive lulls in Atlanta, so that's why they only got out of there with a win. But I would say Michigan can score it here, and if you get a couple stops, then you're going to have a shot. Oregon's two best players are their big guys, so going to have to, Terrace Reed, Will Cheddar, even in combo a little bit, they're going to have to be ready for a brawl because Oregon will send it right down your throat if you don't. But last game Saturday, Joe, before we get into questions, Illinois goes to Rutgers, 4 o'clock on BTN. This is probably going to be, this could go a couple different ways. Rutgers hasn't looked great so far. Their depth hasn't been great. They haven't really played anybody good all year. They did lose to a decent Princeton team on the opening day, but they've had 5 pretty easy wins in a row. They are favored by 1.5 points, according to Torvik, against Illinois. This is a good opportunity for Rutgers to kind of change the narrative on how their season's going.
Sean, I think between this game and the Indiana-Maryland game, these are really big early season matchups because we don't know what Rutgers is. We certainly saw what they were at the Armory versus Princeton, but Illinois, I can't say they almost beat Marquette, but this is a game where whoever loses, they're gonna probably hear about it for a while because if Illinois loses to Rutgers, who a lot of their fans and frankly Big Ten fans envision them to be more talented and frankly better than overall, it's not going to look good, and especially for Illinois. Rutgers didn't really have high expectations. Illinois didn't have them either, but Illinois is expected to be better. And if you look at Illinois' next stretch, you got FAU at home, at Tennessee. So I don't know, Sean. It seems like more of a must-win game for Illinois because if Rutgers does lose, maybe they'll hear about it. But how bad is that really going to get? No one was expecting anything big, as opposed to Illinois. Perhaps this could snowball. Perhaps I'm being melodramatic, but I think this is a big game for the Illini, and they have to be able to score on Rutgers. Simple as that.
Yeah, if you extend that streak a little bit, Joe, you got FAU on a neutral, Tennessee away. You've got a pretty decent Colgate team who's 105 at home, and then you have the bragging rights game against Missouri on a neutral. So those are all really tough games. We've seen a lot of Big Ten teams struggle with those low 100 teams, and those are great for the numbers because those teams grade out way better than a 300. But Illinois played 3 300s in a row coming into this one, and they failed their only test, like you said, against Marquette. So, the season won't be over if they do lose this, but it's an opportunity to have a step in the right direction into a tremendously tough stretch because FAU, if the viewers haven't noticed, they are seriously good. They have a way better team than last year, even though that team went to the Final Four. So that'll be a great game. FAU will probably be favored, but that is it for our basketball preview. We've got some more on Sunday, Creighton, Nebraska, Minnesota, Ohio State, but we're going to reserve the last 5 minutes here for some questions because we haven't had them in a couple episodes. So, Joe, what do you got?
Yeah, thanks everyone for continuing to send them in. We try to get to some of them before we get into this segment, but this one's a football question, Sean, and then we're going to get into some comparison questions, which I'm interested to do those. First one is, do you think Michigan State or Michigan has any interest in Dante Moore, who, for fans who don't know, mainly the basketball listeners, he was a five-star QB from the state of Michigan in Detroit, King High School, uh, ended up committing to Oregon first, then UCLA, played there 7 games, was not great. Um, I think Michigan State definitely has legitimate interest in him. Michigan, I'm not sure they would, simply because of the fact that they don't know whether JJ's going or not. And if you put a gun to their head, I bet you they think he's staying and that they have enough confidence in Jaden Davis, the five-star 2024 guy coming in. So I'd keep an eye on Michigan State more than anyone. I doubt he would want to go to any other Big Ten school. Maybe he'd look at Oregon again, but it's too early to say. Perhaps Notre Dame, not in our conference, so not our concern. But I'd say Michigan State would kick the tires, especially because Jonathan Smith's pretty familiar with UCLA. So, really good question. And that is from Justin, a Michigan State fan. So, thank you, Justin. Sean, this is one for you. This is going to be really interesting. Do you think Penn State football and Purdue basketball are a good comparison, i.e., being 1 game away? That is from Nico, Boilermaker friend, I think.
I would think so, of like all the teams you could compare, maybe, but Purdue has been like they've been picked off at different stages. I guess if you were to call like in a 12-team playoff, if Penn State were to win the first round and then lose to a top 4 team, but in a couple ways. But I think it's a little bit of a stretch because you don't get to play a team in the 300s in Ken Palm in football and happen to lose to them, even though you are so much better and so much stronger and so much faster than them. That would never happen in football. But I guess in a couple ways, coming 1 game short, Purdue's they made the Sweet 16 2 years ago, which is probably, I don't know, a good comparison for making the college football playoff or just missing it and then kind of
Being New Year's Six, yeah.
yeah. So I guess in a couple ways, but only if you want to get real into it.
Yeah. This was another one. We don't have a name on this, or I can't really read the name out, so not cleanest. But uh, can you think of a comparison to Iowa football? So the basketball comparison to Iowa football is what he's referring to. He or she's referring to. This is tough, and I'm not going to do it by style of play. I think we're going to do it by being just good enough, but not really good enough to satisfy your fans. And that doesn't necessarily mean Penn State football. It probably just means you frustrate your fans more than give them hope, which is what Iowa football has done. I would say Illinois basketball, Sean, a program on paper that's been really good. I think they've been pretty good on paper, but it's just the fact they haven't been back to the second weekend is frustrating the heck out of fans. The same way, excuse me, Iowa football can't perform offensively, so it prevents them from, going to New Year's Six consistently and from, competing to get into the playoff because they haven't really competed to be in the playoffs since 2015. So I think that'd be my comparison. What about you, Sean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I can't really think of another one, so I'll go into the coaches a little more. Like you said, Penn State, James Franklin, 9-3 at Vanderbilt, but 10-2 at Penn State. Brad Underwood was awesome at Stephen F. Austin. Multiple 30-win seasons there, brings them to the tournament multiple times. Oklahoma State in his 1 year there brought them to the tournament. But he really hasn't gotten Illinois much further than he did with those two schools. So, maybe a little further, like he won the first round game. They went to the round of 32 a couple times. But I think the coaches are an excellent comparison there because they did, more than anyone could expect at their previous schools, and they're just falling not a little bit short. They're still having good seasons and still there most seasons, but ultimately not probably where they want to be.
Yeah. And Sean, these have been in the queue for a few weeks now. It's from Noah, our Michigan fan. So he's asking for more comparisons. I think maybe someone put out a story, but can you think of a comparison to Ohio State and Michigan football for Big Ten basketball? And I frankly don't think you can because over the past decade, you can't really tell me the major force in the conference. Like you could make arguments, Michigan State and Michigan have been the best in March. Purdue's been the best regular season team and the best tournament conference tournament team. Uh, maybe I mean I wouldn't even say Michigan State. I mean Purdue that's just more scattered. So I don't think you can simply because football over the past 7 seasons, assuming Michigan pulls it out Saturday, it'll be 4 Ohio State and 3 Michigan titles. Basketball, we don't really see that a lot. Just the
Yeah.
nature of the sport, kind of.
Yeah, there's been no team. I mean, even Ohio State and Michigan, barring, the COVID year for Michigan, they've been in the playoff or with a shot at the playoff with one game to go most times. And, there's not really a team that, there's been teams that have real good 3 or 4 year stretches in hoops, but no real rivalries. I mean, Indiana and Purdue have not been good at the same, like really, really good at the same time. I mean, we're going back to the Mike Davis days for IU, and Indiana was okay last year and definitely a 15 to 20th team, but you haven't had a Big Ten game really since IU and Michigan, Joe, in 2012 and 2013, where it's been like a 1 versus 2 or 3 versus 5 or something like that I'm aware of. So I don't really think there's a good explanation because there hasn't really been there's been a lot more parity in basketball than football. We got the same teams at the top most years on the gridiron, but not on the basketball court.
Yeah. Sean, we're going to end with this question. This is a Michigan State question. This is from Brad. Or I think he's asked a question before on here. Thanks for asking a question, Brad. A lot of people in Detroit media, no, I'm sorry, Michigan local media, talk about Tom Izzo's record post Cassius Winston, which has not been too good, especially for Michigan State basketball standards. Is this current 4-3 start to the season a concern? And I would say it's a concern for your Final Four, like world beater expectations that you came into the season with. Now we can examine whether those expectations were fair later on, but in terms of like your overall program, I think that's pretty unfair to say on November 30th. Sean, do you have anything to comment on that?
It's harder to do well in March if you have a worse seed, which is pretty easy to come to the conclusion. But Penn State was a seven, or not Penn State, sorry, Michigan State was a 7 seed last year. They do pull off one upset, but then they lose in the Elite Eight or Sweet 16, one of the two. But this is just another one of those years where Michigan State will probably be good in March, but their seed will not be as good as they're playing because they got beat up in November. And this was supposed to be the year that didn't happen. So I guess maybe a little bit concerning. It just makes it a lot more difficult. If you're a 1 seed, you can make it 2, 3 games in the tournament without really being tested. Now, there's upsets every year and stuff like that. But if you're a 7 seed, which they were last year, you're going to play a team with NBA prospects at least in the first round, which they did in USC. So, it definitely hurts the Final Four chances. It doesn't make it impossible, but it is a whole lot more difficult.
Yeah. Thank you for being patient on those questions. We did try to answer them throughout episodes. So if you did hear yours, perhaps we answered it on earlier episodes, earlier in those podcasts. But Sean, I'm really excited for this weekend. I really think if you don't want to watch the Big Ten title game, and frankly, I wouldn't blame you. There are a lot of good college basketball games on in the Big Ten. And if you don't want to watch Northwestern Purdue or the Maryland Indiana game, you can watch a Creighton Nebraska or Michigan, Oregon, and Marquette, Wisconsin. I think Marquette, Wisconsin might have the best environment of all these games, Sean, simply because of the excitement and in-state kind of rivalry. So, going to be really intrigued to see how all these teams look, and I think we'll know a lot more about them. Not the final case study, but a lot more about them than we previously did. Because frankly, a lot of them, like Indiana, this is their first real test.
Yeah, we're going to have a number of basketball things to talk about here, but after this week, it's just going to be a lot of bowl games and transfer portal stuff for footballs until after Christmas, for hopefully a team from the Big Ten in the college football playoffs. So we'll definitely have more time for questions. We're just going to try and keep these at 30, 35, 40 minutes. I know we've been going closer to 40, but there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So I don't think we're wasting anybody's time. But that's all we have for you today.